the kidnap, torture, and murder of a young couple. The video you are about to watch contains graphic and disturbing details and is one of the most harrowing crimes in modern American true crime history. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. On a cold January night, a beautiful young couple left home to attend a birthday celebration. It was an ordinary evening, the kind filled with laughter, casual plans, and the comfort of being together. Within hours, that normal life was violently torn away. What followed over the next 48 hours was straight out of a nightmare. Christopher Newsome was restrained, isolated, and subjected to relentless cruelty. He was beaten, bound, and essayed. When his captors decided he no longer served their purpose, they took him to a desolate railroad line in the freezing darkness and shot him. In a final attempt to erase their crime, his body was set ablaze. Shannon Gail Christian, his girlfriend, was left behind in the house where the nightmare began. She endured prolonged essay at the hands of her captors. Her suffering ended in unimaginable cruelty, alone, trapped, and terrified. This is the story of what truly happened during those final 48 hours and what came after. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe to Creepy True Cases. Let's begin. To understand the magnitude of this loss, we must first understand who the victims were beyond the headlines. Shannon Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Texas. When she was 12 years old, her family relocated to Knoxville, Tennessee, and deeply bonded with her best friend, Cara, who shared much of her daily life outside of school. Shannon stood out not just for her beauty, but for her intelligence and warmth. She studied sociology at the University of Tennessee and was on track to graduate in December 2007. Friends and family described her as joyful, playful, and compassionate, the kind of person who brought light into any room she entered. She worked part-time, saved diligently, and purchased a Toyota 4Runner to make commuting easier. She came from a loving home and dreamed of building that same kind of future for herself. That future, she believed, was with Christopher Newsome Jr. Christopher was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville. He was widely admired, kind, respectful, and driven. A gifted athlete, he played baseball for the Hall's Red Devils and was considered by many to have professional potential. Instead, he followed a different passion. He worked briefly as a mechanic before discovering a deep love for carpentry and woodworking. When Shannon and Christopher met, their connection was immediate. They began dating in November 2006 and quickly became inseparable. They introduced each other to family and friends, and those close to them saw a couple deeply in love, grounded, hopeful, and serious about their future. They were always together, including on the night they disappeared. On January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher sat inside her SUV in a Knoxville parking lot, talking casually before heading to a friend's birthday party. They had no idea they were being watched. Nearby, 3 men sat in another vehicle, scanning the area for an opportunity. Their names were Lamarcus Davidson, a recently released felon with a violent past, his brother Latalvis Cobbins, and their associate Eric Boyd. They were searching for an easy target, a quick robbery, or perhaps a stolen car. Instead, they found Shannon and Christopher. Armed and deliberate, the men approached the vehicle and forced the couple at gunpoint into submission. But this was not a simple carjacking. Shannon and Christopher were restrained, forced into the back seat and driven away, taken to a small, isolated house on Chipman Street, where Davidson lived. Inside the house, others soon arrived. Davidson's girlfriend, Vanessa Coleman, and another associate, George Thomas, joined the scene. Their lack of surprise made one thing clear: this was not an accident. It was a shared crime. Valuables were taken. Then Christopher was dragged into another room. What followed was hours of abuse, physical, psychological, and dehumanizing. Shannon, restrained elsewhere in the house, could hear his cries and pleas, powerless to help. Eventually, the violence escalated beyond control. Later that night, Christopher was forced into a vehicle and driven to a remote railroad track. He was tortured and forced to walk a good distance barefoot on the snow. Then a small-caliber handgun was raised. 3 shots rang out. Christopher Newsome was dead. In an attempt to destroy evidence, his body was wrapped in a thick bedding and set on fire. Days later, a railroad worker would discover the remains. Dental records confirmed the identity. Christopher Newsom was 23 years old. When Shannon and Christopher didn't return home that night, concern quickly turned into panic. They had never arrived at the birthday party. This revelation sent shockwaves through both families. Something was wrong. The Knoxville Police Department informed them that a formal missing persons search would begin if the couple failed to return within 24 hours. Unwilling to wait, family members and friends took matters into their own hands, organizing searches across the city and following every lead they could find. The phone records of the couple soon revealed some critical information. Shannon's phone last connected to a cell tower near Cherry Street, north of Knoxville. That changed when authorities received a report of a burned body discovered near a railroad line. The search instantly escalated. Inside the Chipman Street house, Shannon was being held captive. She was kept under watch, most often by Vanessa Coleman. Shannon had no way of knowing that Christopher was already dead. When the men returned to the house, the violence intensified. Shannon was subjected to prolonged and repeated SA, left injured and terrified on the floor between assaults. At one point, an unexpected visitor arrived, Lamarcus Davidson's former girlfriend, Daphne. The group quickly concealed Shannon, ensuring she was not seen or heard. As Daphne prepared to leave, Lamarcus handed her a bag of belongings. Unbeknownst to him, it contained items that did not belong there, clothing stained with blood. After Daphne left, the group attempted to eliminate any trace of what they had done. Shannon was doused in bleach and forced to swallow some, in an effort to destroy evidence. Even then she was still alive. In the final act of cruelty, she was sealed inside a plastic bag and placed into a trash bin. Trapped, injured, and alone, Shannon Gale Christian suffocated to death in the darkness. Back in Knoxville, investigators were closing in. Shannon's SUV was located abandoned on Cherry Street. Inside, police immediately recognized signs of violence: mud tracked throughout the interior, the driver's seat pushed far back, personal items missing. Among the items left behind was a crucial clue: an envelope bearing an address, 2316 Chipman Street. Police arrived at the house on January 9th. It was empty. Whoever had been there had fled. As officers began a thorough search, they uncovered a most shocking scene. When they opened the kitchen trash bin, they found Shannon's body. The brutality of the discovery left seasoned investigators shaken to their core. Other personal belongings were found throughout the house: Christopher's baseball cap, Shannon's electronics, and items clearly taken as trophies. DNA samples and fingerprints pointed directly to Lamarcus Davidson, a dangerous ex-convict, and his brother. A nationwide manhunt was launched to find the criminals behind this horrific crime. Lamarcus, realizing that the police had found his home, initially sought refuge with his ex-girlfriend Daphne, the same woman who had unknowingly carried away critical evidence. As news coverage exploded, his face became impossible to escape. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Daphne demanded he leaves the house. With nowhere else to go, Lamarcus moved from house to house alongside Eric Boyd. One by one, doors closed. Eventually, the two hid in an abandoned house, but Eric made a fatal mistake. While going out to get a burger, he was stopped and identified. Phone records showed consistent contact with Lamarcus during the time of the murders. Taken into custody, Eric chose to cooperate. In exchange for leniency, he revealed Lamarcus's location, and the police swooped in and arrested Lamarcus. At the time of his arrest, Lamarcus was wearing Christopher's shoes. Some of Shannon's belongings had already been given away as gifts. During interrogation, Lamarcus changed his story repeatedly. Eventually, he named his accomplices: LaTalvis Cobbins, Eric Boyd, George Thomas, and Vanessa Coleman. All were arrested that same day. Vanessa claimed she had been threatened and held against her will. This was difficult for the investigators and the court given the amount of evidence against her. DNA evidence confirmed that Lamarcus and LaTalvis had directly participated in the SA. Vanessa and George were charged for their roles in facilitating the crimes. Eric, though not directly linked to the murders, was charged for helping conceal evidence and harboring a fugitive. In 2008, the trials began. Shannon's and Christopher's parents sat through every agonizing detail. Evidence was presented in full and the descriptions were so disturbing that prosecutors struggled. One was forced to leave the courtroom after becoming physically ill. The verdicts then followed. Eric Boyd was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Latalvis Cobbins received life imprisonment without parole. George Thomas was sentenced to life in prison. Vanessa Coleman, just 18 years old at the time of the crime, was sentenced to 53 years. Lamarcus Davidson was sentenced to death with no possibility of appeal. For a moment, it appeared justice had finally been served, but the story was not over. Something was left out, something that would reopen old wounds and force both families to relive the nightmare all over again. Just when it seemed the case had reached its end, another shock emerged, this time from within the justice system itself. Judge Richard Baumgartner, the man who presided over key portions of the original trials, admitted to a long-standing drug addiction. Investigators soon uncovered that he had been obtaining illegal substances from convicted felons, some of whom appeared before him in court. In return, he had granted legal favors. The revelation sent tremors through Tennessee's legal system. Baumgartner was forced to resign. He was disbarred, publicly disgraced, and formally indicted. State officials concluded that during the trials, he had been compromised, impaired, and unfit to serve as a judge. As a result, several cases he had overseen, including the case of Shannon and Christopher, were ordered to be reviewed. For the families involved, it was nightmare all over again. In 2012, the case returned to court once again. Shannon's and Christopher's parents were forced to relive the most devastating chapter of their lives. Evidence was re-examined and testimonies were replayed. After deliberation, the court ruled that most of the original sentences would stand. However, two significant changes were made. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from 53 years to 25. Eric Boyd's role was re-evaluated. New findings led prosecutors to charge him as the individual who had fired the fatal shots that killed Christopher Newsom. This time there would be no leniency. Eric Boyd was sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years, without the possibility of parole. After more than 12 years of trials, appeals, retrials, and heartbreak, justice was finally delivered fully and definitively. Every individual responsible for the deaths of Shannon Gale Christian and Christopher Newsom was permanently removed from society. They would never harm another innocent life again. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, where so much suffering occurred, was demolished. In its place, a memorial now stands, honoring two lives taken far too soon. Scholarship foundations were established in Shannon's and Christopher's names, ensuring that their legacy would not be defined by how they died, but by how others are helped to live, learn, and dream because of them. Though they were denied the future they deserved, their story continues to give opportunity, awareness, and remembrance. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please like and subscribe to support creepy true cases. See you in the next video.